So welcome to Estate Planning in an Islamic Context. This is just the beginning for us to basically introduce to you guys a little bit about, what is it, what does it have to do with Islam, and how can wills and trusts be incorporated into our faith. So we will give a very short presentation because we're very limited in time, but hopefully, inshallah, this will be something that, we will be able to come back and give more information about. So. I'm an attorney. I spent most of my time in court. I've done criminal and commercial litigation in the last few years. I've been a prosecutor and public defender. Come on in, sir. And just recently teamed up with both Arthur and Tom and Ahmad to basically give back to our community. We've been doing this for a little bit. We want to make sure that we connect with the community and we give back to the community as much as we can. So. We'll stick around. So first, this is Ahmad Caleb. He's the founder and managing attorney of Caleb Law Firm. I will look at my notes so I don't forget any of his important accomplishments. We're very lucky to have him. Ahmad was born in the Middle East and spent his youth between Washington State, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Palestine. He's a member of the local Arab American and Muslim American community. He earned his bachelor's degree in political science at the University of Washington, and after a career in sales and marketing, he returned to school and received his Juris Doctor cum laude at Seattle University. After law school, Ahmad founded the Caliph Law Firm and has centered his practice around plaintiff's representation in the personal injury arena, as well as providing estate planning and guidance for individuals and families, and also providing legal counsel and representation to small businesses in many different areas. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
You haven't missed out much.
Yeah, I want to make sure people are able to hear because I know there is a lot of
I can
noise coming
stand
out.
too.
Everybody can hear?
Should I stand?
Is this something to speak into, or is just
No,
sit on the
actually,
table?
just for that. I think it's better to use
All right.
just to be, because there's a little bit.
Okay. Can everybody hear me now? Better? Okay. Did you miss anything? No. Okay. So that's Ahmad. We're very lucky to have him here and to be able to present tonight. We also have Arthur DeLong. Hi, Arthur. Arthur is an associate attorney at Richard Levinson Law Firm and of counsel at Caliph Law Firm. So we all work together. Arthur practices in the areas of business organizations, commercial transactions, finance, and estate planning. Arthur often acts as outside general counsel to clients from a variety of industries spanning entertainment, technology, and financial services. He has extensive international experience and is an active member of the Washington State Bar Association International Practice Section, the American Bar Association Section on International Law, and the Middle Eastern Legal Association of Washington. Arthur holds a law degree cum laude, also from Seattle University School of Law, a master's degree in international business from Albert School of Business, and a bachelor's degree in diplomacy, world affairs, and Spanish from Occidental College. In addition to his work as an attorney, Arthur has a background in banking and finance, and he speaks fluent Spanish, if that will become necessary. Also, Ahmad speaks fluent Arabic. I speak fluent Turkish, if it makes a difference. Last but not least, I want to introduce Tom Polson. We are very lucky to have Tom here. Tom is the CEO of Fala Capital. Fala Capital was started as a passion project while Mr. Polson was working at the Investor for Securities Company. It's a multi-billion-dollar real estate focused on Islamic investment bank in Riyadh. After 3 years in Riyadh, Mr. Polson moved back home to Seattle in 2014 and incorporated Fala with the help of a strong investor base. Fala Capital is in the business of assisting a range of companies and investment groups comes up with innovative Islamic financing and investment products. Mr. Polson regularly divides his time between the United States and Saudi Arabia. I think you were just about to go there, or you just got back? Probably both.
Combination of everything.
Probably both, yeah. So, Mr. Polson was a featured speaker at the 2014 World Islamic Economic Forum, 2015 Global Competitiveness Forum, and 2016 Jeddah Economic Forum. He holds a bachelor's degree in international management and marketing from Franklin University, Switzerland, postgraduate diploma from the Institute of Islamic Banking and Insurance in London, and a master's in Islamic Banking and Finance from Bangor Business School in Wales. So thank you for being here, everybody. We're going to get started. First person will be Ahmad.
Assalamu alaikum. So everybody, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview about estate planning, what is it, and the very basic estate planning vehicles from a general perspective. And as Fatima said, Arthur's going to talk about more how that relates to the Islamic side of things. So with estate planning, the typical estate planning vehicles are, many of you probably know them, wills, trusts, and then there's things that some people don't traditionally think about, but they are definitely estate planning vehicles, such as healthcare directives. Those are things that you can decide that you want to happen when you're nearing the end of your life, but you want certain medical things to happen. Financial power of attorney, where if you're at that phase of your life and you need someone to deal with their financial affairs, that's what that's for. Power of attorney for healthcare decisions is similar, it's just having to deal with, obviously, healthcare decisions. So, basically, what estate planning vehicles do is they deal with only what's called probate assets, right? And then you have non-probate assets, which are dealt with separately. So that's not really dealt with in wills. Non-probate assets are things like life insurance, IRAs, 401k, transfer on death accounts, pay on death accounts. And many of us actually have transfer on death or pay on death accounts. A lot of bank accounts are actually already that way. We just don't necessarily know that. And there's things to think about when you're doing your estate planning beyond just the vehicles and the probate and non-probate assets. There's tax consequences, there's state tax thresholds that if your estate is worth a certain amount, there's taxes on it, and then there's federal tax thresholds. So these are all things that you want to think about as part of your whole estate planning process. In addition, and this is very important for us as Muslims, your funeral plans and then your final arrangements. So we have certain requirements for how we are to be buried and what's going to happen with that. And we also have certain, we have a responsibility to make sure that that's provided for, so it's not a financial burden on our families. So this is all part of the estate planning process, and this is something that each one of us really has a duty as Muslims to address, think about at the very least, if not plan for, so it's dealt with. And then there's other things such as long-term care as we get older. So let's talk about what an estate is. Many of you probably know, but basically it consists of all your property, okay? And it also consists of entitlements and obligations, as that says. So property can be thought of in three different categories, broad categories. There's real property, which is your residential, your house, the land you live on, commercial real estate, things like that. Also there's personal property, which cash, cars, jewelry, things like that, and then intellectual property. All these things are things that you can deal with in your estate plan. And I think, as Arthur will get into a little bit more, that is something as Muslims we have to account for. We have to have something that deals with that, so it's the disposition of that upon our passing. Let's talk about, from a legal perspective, what happens when you die. So your assets, whether or not you have an estate plan, they're subject to a legal proceeding called probate. In Washington State, this is a process where a court's going to determine if there's a will, if the will is valid, and then either way, the assets are going to be distributed according to the dictates of the will, if there is one. And I'll talk about what happens if there isn't a will in a moment. If there's a will, they appoint a personal representative, and then this is what's great. So what drew me to this area of the law as I got into law school was, as a Muslim, this is something that we've actually been dealing with for a millennia, long before there was any state laws about it. So as you know, as Muslims, our obligations have to be met first. So any debts we have to be taken care of. Well, Washington State has the same requirements on us legally. So your creditors or any debts that you have to be taken care of. And then once that's done, the personal representative will then pay any income and estate taxes that may be applicable. And then your assets are distributed according to the will. If you don't have a will, and this is why it's important to think about this, especially for Muslims, it's a process called intestacy, and excuse me. Basically, there's state statutes that determine for you how your assets get distributed. This is important for us to think about as Muslims because those statutes, it's not bad, but they may not align with our beliefs. Also, beyond the distribution of your assets, it also deals with who the minor children are going to, who gets guardianship of them and how they're raised. And so these are things that as Muslims we really, really want to pay attention to, and this is why estate planning is such an important thing for an American Muslim to think about. So the next thing is, there's two main vehicles that people use, as I mentioned, to plan for their estate. So there's the will, and then there's a trust. They're very similar. I think if we were going to boil it down to a simplistic way of differentiating the two, is a will is very rigid. So you write the will, it has to meet certain requirements. Now in Washington State, there's some minimum requirements for a will to be valid. It has to be in writing, it has to be signed by the testator, that's the person leaving the stuff and the assets, and then it also has to be witnessed, the signing of the will has to be witnessed by 2 witnesses, or in the alternative, they can say that they know that the testator signed it and then have that notarized. That's the bare minimum requirements. There's many other things that go into making a will. So there's that, but then the will is basically going to say one thing and it cannot really be altered until you do what's called a codicil, which is like an amendment, but it's subject to all the same rigidity and requirements of the will. So what happens is if somebody doesn't foresee certain things, there's only so much you can plan for, it may not really give the true intent of the testator, which is why a trust is great because it gives a lot more flexibility. Especially if you want certain things accounted for, but that you can't really know what's going to play out. So for example, a trust requires the settlor, that's the person that's creating the trust, to appoint a trustee, that's the person that's in charge of the trust, to basically manage the trust, and it's not just for assets, so it can do certain things like it could deal with the guardianship of children and all that. And that person, the trustee, has a fiduciary duty, obligation, just like I do as an attorney to my clients. The trustee has one to the settlor and to the beneficiaries. And this is a really good vehicle if you want to specify a very intricate system for disposition of your assets. So, as I mentioned, we talked about wills a little bit. I kind of jumped ahead of the slide. But one of the things that you can do in a will, and I want to highlight that, is you can assign for the custodianship of funds for your children in a trust. So you can actually create a trust with a will. It just gives it life. Or you can assign for the guardianship of your children. These are really important things. I've talked to a lot of brothers and sisters in the community, not necessarily here tonight, but over time, since before I was in law school and until now. And I often get asked, well, you know, I can go on LegalZoom or one of these websites and just do it like that. I often advise people, that's fine, you could do that, but that's not always advisable because they're not always really tailored to meet, to account for state laws, and then also for our needs as Muslims. There's so many things that we want to account for and think about. You really want to try to consult with an attorney, and then if you're able, an attorney who understands our faith and the dictates of our faith. So with that, I'm going to kind of give it up to Arthur here, who's going to talk a little bit more about trusts and then the Islamic context. One thing I do want to mention too, that's not traditionally thought of as estate planning, but it's something that I practice in, insurance. A lot of people don't necessarily in our community agree with insurance, and that's fine. Automobile insurance is something that people don't think about as estate planning, but the fact is, I deal with car accidents. That's what I actually do outside of estate planning. I represent people who've been injured. 6 out of 10 drivers in Washington State, according to the National Highway Traffic and Safety Board, are driving without insurance. And I can tell you it's really awful I represent people who've been harmed by people who don't have enough insurance or have any. So one of the things you want to do, and I do this with every one of my clients, is I sit them down and say, let's look at your insurance. I don't sell insurance, okay? I want to make sure you guys understand that. I often sue insurance companies to protect my clients. Look at your insurance, make sure you have adequate insurance to plan for the event that somebody causes you harm, causes your family harm, but they're not insured. Make sure you're protected. So that's something to think about. It's a personal decision if you do it, but just keep in mind that many, many people can avert some huge disasters by just doing that. And it's not traditionally estate planning, but it's a very valuable vehicle. With that, Arthur.
I'm going to take this behind you. Good evening. My name is Arthur. I'm very happy to be here to speak to all of you tonight. I will be speaking a bit about Islamic estate planning. And I wanted to start with a hadith that says that it is the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequeath not to let 2 nights pass without writing a will about it. The format of what I'm going to talk about is essentially going to take, is going to focus on 3 different parts. The kind of constituent parts of Islamic estate planning. That is the wasiya bequest, which has the potential to account for up to 1/3 of your estate. Islamic heirs, which are set out in the Quran. And I will briefly touch on awqaf, or Islamic trusts, that can be created during life or with a pour-over provision in a will. Before I kind of get into some of the details on these constituent parts, I just briefly want to talk about separate and community property as it exists in Washington State. There are 2 different forms of property. Separate property in a husband and wife relationship. Each person has the potential to have their own separate property. They also have, and that's the property that they entered into the marriage with, or that might meet certain characteristics after marriage. Then there is another type of property called community property. Community property is 50% the property of, in this scenario, the husband, and 50% the property of the wife. When you're thinking about an estate plan, the only property that you can give away, which just inherently makes sense, is the property that you personally own. So that is your 50% of community property and your separate property. When we talk about estate planning in an Islamic context, the first constituent part is called the wasiya bequest. And this is essentially what the equivalent document would be in Washington State is a last will and testament, which Ahmad has covered in detail. The wasiya bequest, however, is only eligible to give away up to 1/3 of your total estate. This portion of your estate is bequeathed after payment of any debts, funeral expenses, and obligations. Now, there is a slight difference of opinion in who is eligible to receive a bequest under the wasiya bequest. The flexibility that the wasiya bequest offers you is that you're able to give away that 1/3 of your estate to whomever you choose. However, certain schools of thought state that if someone is a Quranic heir, that is that they have a definite share that is stated in the Quran, they are not eligible to receive a portion of the wasiya bequest. As kind of a side note, inter vivos gifts that are given away during your lifetime are not a part of your estate plan. They're not subject to this 1/3 requirement. While you're alive, you're able to give gifts. There could be, if they're quite large, there may be tax consequences, but you're able to give gifts away to whomever you choose. With the exception that if you are on your deathbed, anything that you give away at that point is considered part of that 1/3 wasiya bequest. One final note before I move on to Islamic heirs, the Wasiya bequest, because it has the characteristics of a last will and testament, is the type of document that you would want to use to plan for guardianship of your children. This is an extremely important thing to go over with your attorney. If you don't plan for guardianship of your children, the court has to decide what happens with your children. That could result in foster care or any number of different things. If you plan for it in advance and it makes up a part of your Wasiya bequest, your last will and testament, that your children will be taken care of by the people that you outline in that provision. Islamic heirs. So the other 2/3 of your estate, according to Islamic scholars, these 2/3 are intended to be given in definite shares in specific amounts to a certain eligible family members. The Quran has 3 different verses in Surah Al-Nisa, 4:11, 4:12, and 4:176, that set out a list of individuals, your mother, father, husband / widower, wife / widow, daughter, son, brothers, sisters, whether full or half, and your paternal grandfather, maternal grandmother, and agnotic granddaughter, which is would be the daughter of your son. Those last 3 are added by juristic analogy. They're not actually mentioned in the Quran, but this is the list of individuals who receive a definite share. After that definite share is given, and I will go over in a little bit of detail in a moment what those definite shares look like, whatever is left after the definite shares are given away is called the asaba. It's essentially your residuary estate of that 2/3. This is given in accordance with a list of individuals. If they are alive, they receive 100% of the asaba. So if you have children, if you have only one son, your son receives 100% of the remainder after that definite share is given away. If you have multiple sons or sons and daughters, your children together receive 100% of the asaba, with the exception that a son receives twice the amount that a daughter would receive. If there are no children, that residuary goes to your father. If your father's not alive but your grandfather is, it goes up the paternal line, father, grandfather, great-grandfather. Similarly, if none of them are alive, then brothers, uncles, etc. There's a little bit of a list. I wanted to take a moment after outlining that to just create an example family and apply these rules to just this hypothetical family that I've created. So, developed a family where there's a husband and wife, 2 children, a son and a daughter, and the wife's father is still alive. In this scenario, the wife passes away. Here, that's actually large enough where I hope people can see. I've taken all of the rules that as outlined in the Quran and put together a little bit of a chart. As you can see, there is a list of primary heirs and the Quranic share that each is intended to receive. In our example, after the wife passes away, the husband receives a quarter of the estate. The wife's father, if you were to go through this list over here, you essentially would be able to check off who's alive. The wife's father would receive 1/6, and then the children receive the remainder, the asaba. If there's only one son, he receives 100% of the asaba. In this instance, we have a son and a daughter. So that remainder is divided 2/3 to the son, 1/3 to the daughter. The son inherits twice as much as the daughter. To put that into context, once you kind of apply these fractions, and you can see a little bit of why it's slightly complicated, the husband ends up receiving 9/36 of the total estate, the wife's father receives 6/36, the son receives 14/36, and the daughter receives 7/36. This is one of the reasons why it's important to outline all of these provisions in your will or a trust and to sit down with your attorney and put that in writing, because it's something that would not occur under the Washington state statutes. I finally want to talk just a little bit about Islamic trusts, or awqaf. There's a number of different types of trusts that you can use as estate planning vehicles. Islamic trusts can have a relatively wide scope in what in their purpose. They can be for charitable, religious, environmental, public utility, family needs, etc. In setting that aside and talking about the types of trusts that so let me take one step back. Anything that is a waqf can be incorporated into a trust in Washington state. The types of trusts that might be interesting to anybody who's looking at doing an estate plan, thank you, are things like special needs trusts, education trusts for your children, spendthrift trusts. So I just want to take a short minute and focus on the type of trust that I have set up for my own children. My trust is funded through my life insurance. If I die, $500,000 goes into a trust. That's my life insurance proceeds. That's the beneficiary of my life insurance, and funds a trust for the education of my children. My children would receive distributions from that trust in accordance with the terms that I've dictated in the trust. So the trustee would disperse funds for my children's education, for my children's living expenses. This would allow them to pay for college, and my children are only 1 and 3 years old, so the idea of giving them $500,000 isn't exactly probably recommended. The trust allows me to plan for what I would do with that money. That brings us to a point about how a trust works. Trusts have a trustee that invests the assets and distributes those assets in accordance with the terms of the trust for the beneficiaries, in this case, my children. The trustee can invest those assets in a Sharia-compliant method. That is one of the many reasons why we have Tom here to speak about Sharia-compliant assets, Sharia-compliant investments. And I'll turn it over to you, Tom, and you can talk a little bit about trust and waqfs.
Yes.
Awqaf.
What's that? Are we good?
Assalamu alaikum. It's good to be back at MAPS. It's been a while. I've attended some conferences here, know some of the board members. Even at one point we were planning the endowment for the entire masjid. Inshallah, we can still do that one day. You know, it's kind of laid out in the beginning. You know, most of my background is in Sharia compliant finance, asset management, and you know, it is an industry of nuance. I mean, I look around the room and there is as much diversity in this room as there is in Islamic finance. We have multiple schools of thought. We have multiple rule books. You have some scholars that will sign fatwas for 2 opposing products that have completely different rule books. So it's an industry that's a bit of a hodgepodge. And so for us as individuals on a retail level, we really don't have a whole lot of say in how it's done. We don't have a say in the level of customization that can go into our products and services. But the core thing with the waqf is what goes into the waqf stays more times than not. This is something that is, so as the individual passes away and the assets transfer to the waqf, there's this idea that it cannot be taken out by other family members. This is here for perpetual use. Some of us know at one point there was a waqf in Somalia that took care of the mosques in Mecca years and years ago. So these assets inside the waqf has to be Sharia compliant. But what do we fill them? What do we set aside for our children? How do we do this? So really, there's not, unfortunately in the United States, there's not a whole lot of options. Most of us know we have Amana up in Bellingham. They have 4 great products. But this is not a wealth manager. This is a product provider. So then it's up to us as individuals to know how to buy these assets in the right proportions to make the most beneficial outcome. If we know the waqf needs to give away, say, 8% of its assets every year to cover our goals. We want that Waqf assets to go to widows, orphans, education, what have you, healthcare. And if we don't have an asset allocation profile that invests this money in a unique way that can meet those targets, well then the Waqf does not fulfill its original obligation. So this is always something we have to keep in mind. So we have product providers in America, we have wealth managers, but we don't have too many that cross over in between the two. So a lot of us will, maybe we have wealth managers here in Seattle, other places, maybe we have online brokerages, and we buy these assets. So when you have a wealth manager that isn't schooled in the nuance of Sharia, and it's a lot of nuance, it can be a headache for these wealth managers. Because even if you own Sharia compliant stocks, Sharia compliant funds, you have to think about zakat. How much of this do I have to give away every year to the poor? And if you have someone who doesn't know about Sharia screening, doesn't know about zakat, doesn't know the timing of when assets can be added or removed, it's a headache. So my personal opinion, we can go through the slides if you like, or we can talk individually, but the folks out there that are really doing a good job, so there's a company in Florida called Sharia Portfolio. They're not a fund manager, which is great. They're completely independent. But what they are is a wealth manager, and they can manage your endowment, they can manage your personal savings, they can manage your retirement, and they can manage what goes into your trust for your children, future. So there's really not too many. And then in Virginia, you have Azad. Azad is a great institution. But Azad, I hate to say, is not for most of us. Their minimum is $500,000, right? So how do we, and this is the one issue in our industry, is that retail doesn't come into the need. So how do we save for college planning? That's a big one. And if we look at most of the Islamic wealth managers in America, they follow the traditional rule of, well, my client needs to have a minimum of 100,000, and then if you take it up a notch, $500,000. And then if you want something really custom that fits with your specific feelings, right? You better walk in with $1 million. And that's a difficulty a lot of us can't do, and it really sets us back. So how do we really get around this? Who can we work with? Is there anyone in the Seattle community that can really speak to this issue? And I'm afraid to say at the moment, there's not too many. So as we're going through this, there's the only one option that does work for all of us on a retail level is a new company that was set up in New York. It's called Wahed Invest, and is an online robo-advisor. Some of us know about robo-advisors, where the minimum investment is really small, under $10,000, and it follows an algorithm to invest your money in Sharia-compliant assets, and it does it yearly. You can take your $100, $200 out of your bank account every month, and it goes in. That's a great product. Some of us here, work in the tech industry, I'm sure. And some of the folks I met from Microsoft, Amazon, Google, the biggest issue is their 401k plan, right? And this all has to do, what do I do with my retirement? My retirement is not Sharia compliant. Major corporations in America do not offer any options for this. So some take the view not to do it at all. They just let that money sit on the wayside, and they end up not getting the full benefits of their company. Some corporations like Microsoft, in their 401k plan, they have a window where you can buy assets outside of the plan. So you could buy the Amana funds, you could buy the Azad funds, you could buy the funds from Imam. So there are options, but it's the same thing. What is the guide? Who's going to guide us to do this? And this is something that's missing, and so we're all missing out on this. But the one thing we can do on our own to try to prepare for this is everyone in the room could set up an individual retirement account. It could be with an online broker. You could do it with Amana up in Bellingham. And you can put in your $5,000 every year for your individual retirement account. And then when it comes time to retire from your corporate job, or you change jobs, we have this thing called an IRA rollover. So every time you leave a job, retire, you can take those assets you receive from Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Boeing, wherever, and roll them into your Sharia compliant account, and essentially sell off those assets that have been non-compliant, converting them to the compliant. And this is it's not perfect, but it's the greatest option we have at the moment. Because why? Because when we die or we go on, we need those assets to be Sharia compliant to enter the trust or the wills, because you need to start from a clean base to ensure what you're giving doesn't have any negativity attached to it. And from that, I could probably just go on, but maybe it's time for question and answer, and we can, I hope I covered enough. It wasn't too complex. I could have bored you all to death, I'm sure. But, you know, most of my work was in Saudi Arabia, where the scholar has the ultimate say. And that's something I'm used to, the back and forth discussion of why this stock or that stock, or what is their screening methodology, or, you know, how much money did they make from alcohol, or what is the total sales of McDonald's pork in their breakfast sandwiches. So this is something I'm very good at back and forth with, so we can just go on and on if you'd like.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Before we go into the Q&A, one of the things that we earlier talked about is that, thanks to Tom and then Fatima, that we are actually will be allocating once a month where individuals can come and talk on their personal thing, on the will. So it's very important that we understand that it does require one-on-one interaction as well. So I'm going to send this around. So if you want a one-on-one session with all of these guys, just put your email address and phone number so that we can reach out to you. We are in the process of setting up conference room so that it's available for everyone. So I'm going to pass this around.
Thank you. There's a lot of talk about death. It made me uncomfortable. I don't know how everybody else feels. We'd like to think that it's never going to end, right? So it's a little bit scary to think about, but I think that, you know, once you get all of your questions answered and once you get something set up with your trust and will and investments, you know, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of just not have to ever think about it again, inshallah. So how many of you have a will right now? So a little bit of a will? Is that like half a will?
5 years ago, it's not been updated.
It needs to be updated. That's another big important thing, is that a lot of times, you know, when you're...
More than 2 nights.
Yeah.
There was a slide that you should not leave 2 nights without the will, so probably it's gone.
Yeah, so yeah, no, they need to be updated, you know, as your situation changes, obviously. So how many of you have trusts? Investment accounts? A lot more investment accounts. Okay, perfect. Does anybody have any? We did really good on time. We have 20 minutes. I'm going to throw in some questions if you guys know you have a question. Yeah, go ahead. You can stand if you want, just to make it more embarrassing.
So thank you very much. I have a question about the hierarchy of Quranic errors. So there's natural percentages, but what if your assets are cash? So for example, you've got a house that's worth a certain amount and a condo that's worth a certain amount.
Right.
Do you need to liquidate? Because you don't want to put kids in a position where they're kind of fighting over partial shares. Sure. You know what I mean? So how does that work?
Well, can you repeat the question? I don't know if we got that.
Okay, so the question was, if you have assets that are not cash, right, and they are divided up, they're just supposed to be divided up in certain fractions or percentages, how do you actually accomplish that with the fact that real estate can't just be cut in half, right? So this is a question that's both focused on the Islamic inheritance side of things, and also just a general will, right? If you've given a third of your assets or a certain period, half of your assets to 2 of your kids, how do they divide those? You can take assets in kind, so you can take real estate in kind, which means that you take it at the value, and that is given to one person, and the other person is compensated through securities or cash, if that exists. If it doesn't exist, they can, and your children have the ability to do so, they can buy the other child out. They're also able to be on the title in the percentage that they own, or that they're intended to be given the real estate. So if 7/8 of your house is going to be given to child 1 and that other 1/8 is going to child 2, they can actually inherit that asset in those proportions, and if it's ever liquidated, they'll get the proceeds 7/8, 1/8. Does that answer your question?
It does, but it's not satisfying. It doesn't satisfy, right? So like, it still puts us in a position of saying, if there's not some liquid asset that compensates for the difference, you're still having multiple people dealing with the
single asset, right?
Right, you would have multiple, you can have multiple people on the title of the house though. I mean, you're correct that it might be less than ideal. It's actually something that you can sit down in advance and decide that the residence goes to, one person and something else goes to somebody else. You can give it in fractions.
And the heirs themselves decide between themselves?
They can, absolutely. If you say, if you have two children and they're going to take 50-50, you can leave it to them to decide. I mean, you don't have to specify this asset goes to this person, this asset goes to that person. You can do that. You can. It's in Washington State there is a statutory element of estate planning. There's a form that you can attach to your will that you can fill out tangible personal property and assign it to individuals, and then you can take the whole rest, throw it into your residuary and say the children are to divide the assets in accordance with your wishes.
Yeah, but I think the question is, can you say, if I die, sell the property and distribute the cash?
You can require it to be liquidated, absolutely.
I see.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Was that the question? I'm sorry, did I miss that? No.
No, it's the opposite.
Well, that's a
That's
good
the
question
opposite.
too, though. That was actually my follow-up question on it, so. Sir, you had it? Yeah.
Just one quick point about that, and then we'll go to the next question. One thing you can also do, so you can dictate that the property is sold. You can also, and I've created wills that say this, you can grant them what's called a life estate to be shared between them. And life estate allows someone to live in a home. They have the same powers and obligations as the homeowner. They have to pay taxes, they can't cause damage to the house, there's requirements, but it only is for their life. And when they pass, then that life estate ends, and you can dictate who it would go to then. There's a limitation on how far that can go due to state laws, so it can't go on forever. So there's some fun rules we had to learn in law school about those. But you could do that. So that's one option. There's a lot of different options. It just kind of depends on what you want. So, I'm sorry, next question? Go ahead.
So for the will, instead of going into the detail of all this, is it possible to just assign an organization to take care of it? And case of that, like for example, can I assign maps to take care of the distribution of my will after I pass away, without going into any details?
So your question is can you appoint an institution to make the decisions for you?
As to distribution.
Yeah, as to the distribution of assets. Not in a traditional will. You need to have beneficiaries, and actually, no, you can't. In both a will or a trust, you have to have beneficiaries that are real people that exist. You can, in a trust, you can give the trustee, and you can make that an institution. You can give the trustee a lot of power to distribute assets in accordance with the terms of the trust, but you still have to have defined beneficiaries.
Trustee would have to.
Do the beneficiaries have to have names, or can I say, here is the executor of the trust, and the executor must follow Surah Nisa, ayat this, and do the distribution, and then they know who my parents are and who my brother and sister are. I don't have to put their names and addresses and update it every year or every time
There's, unfortunately, it's not that easy. So, a couple of things. One, there is not uniform agreement between all scholars as to how assets are supposed to pass. So even though those rules are outlined, you still get different results when you consult different people. That is one kind of just practical problem. The other problem is that there's a thing called a rule against perpetuities that exists in all states in the United States, and it says that you have to have, there's a number of things that it says, but you have to actually name and define who the people are. They have to be what's called a life in being. And so if you just put titles in, that probably will fail to accomplish your objectives.
So in my case, my old will, so I assigned a trustee, and I said, these are my children, this is my wife.
Yeah.
Whoever is living is going to be getting a distribution in accordance to Islamic laws that the trustee will be designing, because did not want to keep updating it, do not know who's going to die, who's not going to die, and I left it at that. All of my kids, here are the names, here's my wife, whoever is living is going to be distributed, and the trustee will distribute in accordance to the Sharia law. Would that be good enough generalization, or should we really go back and distribute it in accordance to the fractions and all of that?
Well, my first question is it a trust or is it a will? Because if it's a trustee, it's a trust. And if it's a personal representative, it's a will.
I guess I did not understand that there was actually a difference. I wrote it my own.
Sorry.
So I said it's a will.
Okay.
And it's going to go into a trust.
Oh, there's a trust within the will. I understand.
Trustee within the will, and they will distribute it in accordance with that will. And these are the beneficiaries.
Right.
That be.
I'm as an attorney and as somebody that sees will challenges and what's called TEDRA disputes, or trust and estate disputes in Washington, I would advise against that, because it leaves ambiguity, and therefore it leaves the will and trust open to contest. And now everybody always believes that, and I believe this, that my family would never fight over assets, but it's something that can happen, and it's one of the major purposes in this entire exercise of estate planning is to make sure that there is harmony within the family, and leaving things sort of open-ended like that and up to the discretion of whoever you've appointed as the trustee could potentially be problematic. I'm sort of hogging the microphone. If anybody else wants to answer.
So I found a will template.
No, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I found a will template that says, here are my children,
Yeah.
and here's my will, and I want you to distribute it according to that document that was issued by this organization, ISNA or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On that year. Is that fine, or? I don't
I would
list
want-
all the details of all the percentages in the will, but refer to another document
Right.
that has the details of how to do the distribution.
Yeah, you can incorporate a document by reference in most legal documents. It's probably better to spell it out in your actual will itself. Without looking at the documents themselves, I have a difficult time telling you whether that is just fine.
So another thing, just to touch on that, and then we'll get to you two brothers. It's potentially okay, but the thing you want to think about, if you're ever referring to another institution, another document, those things may not be in existence at the time that you pass. And so the reason why we always, as attorneys who do estate planning, we always stress I'm not good at that word, being really specific. Yes, specificity, I think I got it. Is because it, like Arthur said, we want to avert any problems. We want to create family harmony. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for us Muslims, has outlined for us so many things, and then the scholars have been tasked with, over the years, Islamic scholars, to interpret them so as to create harmony between us, between our families and in our faith. And so you just want to think about that when you're planning your estate. It is a daunting task. I understand. I'm a single male and I have an estate plan. And it was daunting just for me, and I don't really have a lot. But there's things I care about, so it's worth it. It is part of having a family. It is part of your obligation to look at that. So, go ahead.
Is there any such requirement that all or any beneficiaries have to be in US or maintain any legal status in US, or they can be anywhere in the world?
Anywhere in the world, and you can also you can specify assets. It does get complex, just so I'm clear about that. But you can even give away in certain situations. And Arthur has actually, I think, dealt with this a little bit more, assets that are overseas. So there's many people who, they may live here, they may be residents here, citizens here, but they also are residents or citizens of other countries, have assets there. In fact, I dealt with this with my father, who he now lives here, but he still has some assets in Jordan. He's a citizen there. So The thing is, and the difficulty is, the country where those assets are, we can't necessarily here as U.S. attorneys dictate how things are distributed over there. So you may want to work in conjunction with or hire an attorney in that country, so make sure that those laws are followed, because we can only deal with the laws here that we have in the United States and specifically Washington, but we can do multi-state things as well. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, so is it totally safe to have beneficiaries like somewhere else in the world?
Yes.
They will take care of it.
That is, yeah, correct. Go ahead.
If you die without a will or a trust, how does the state really distribute? What is the process, and how do they decide where?
Intestacy.
It was the question, if you don't have a will or a trust?
You don't have a will.
You don't have anything, you just,
Die,
you pass away, okay. So the process is called intestacy, and your assets flow to, sorry, I thought people were knocking there for a second, distracted me. Your assets flow in accordance with the Washington State statutes for intestacy. So your executor, in this case, or anybody who is related to you, goes to the court and they ask them to open a probate estate for someone who did not have a will, and there's a series of legal processes. You need an attorney. It's expensive. It's more expensive than having a will, but eventually, to get to the end of your question, your assets first pass in equal shares to your children. If one of your children has predeceased you but has children themselves, those children take in representation. So if you have 3 kids, your assets are divided into 3 equal shares. And in this instance, one of your children has already passed away but had children themselves. That those children of the deceased child receive equal shares of of your estate, and then the other 2 remaining children would each receive 1/3. So, and then to continue on, if you do not have any children, your parents would inherit. If you do not have parents that are living, I kind of envision this as like a pyramid. The assets descend down to your brothers and sisters, their children if they're not alive. If nobody's alive in that pyramid, it goes up to your grandparents, your uncles and aunts, and continues on down.
Does that mean you're forced to sell those assets, or you just the title comes first?
It's good. I mean, if you don't have anything that specifies otherwise, most likely everything would be liquidated and flow. If it's real property, it might be different.
Brother right there.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for as I see, there is a really great lot of needs, but I don't think that it is enough for a big panel to satisfy all the what is
Yeah.
there is also other alternatives that maybe not perfect, but maybe you know part of them, and some of them are through some website. And I want to ask you about how good are they, like wasiya.com specifically, or other ones that are geared toward Muslim, but not in big assets or big trust that could be used as a good alternative. I think that these wasiya.com have people that are kind of very specialized in that, and they have some backing. So what do you think? What do you know about, or any other alternative?
So I have never looked at the documents from wasiya.com, so I can't specifically comment on them. I have seen documents from other types of websites, and the challenges that you face are that they are not usually tailored to an individual state. So Washington State has some kind of weird provisions that are different, and every state has. Every state has its own laws that pertain to asset distribution upon someone's death. they're different in every state. If you don't take those into account, you can potentially make an error. Some of them, yeah.
Their claim is that they have studied that for each state, and they have some specialized people, and that's their claim in their
Well,
they are valid for all legally in all states, specifically because they are specified for each state.
Without having looked at those documents specifically and read through them, I unfortunately can't comment as to their validity or their worth.
But you understand the challenges is that there isn't enough people or attorneys or other people specialized that would take care of all the needs, although there is a need, but there is somehow to be satisfied, although not perfectly, somehow there might be some avenue that could be better than at least second best.
I think I would just add one thing to this. I think I totally agree because individual situation is different. And that's the whole reason that both Ahmed and Arthur has kind of graciously accepted to do once a month walk-ins. You can actually register it, get the time, and have one-on-one session with these lawyers, and then can guide you in your specific situation. On top, our Sheikh Javan is also will be helping if there is a Sharia-related things that you need a guidance. So with both the lawyers as well as Sheikh Javan available to help answer, I think we think is that it provides the opportunity to have one-on-one conversation and resolve it to whatever is best for you and your family. And that's why, sorry? Yeah.
What I'm saying is that if I look at just the sample of there is a really great need if you take into account all the people that are not present.
That's right.
And that's what I am saying is that from the panel and the people that are represented as Islamic background, there's only few.
That's right.
And they could satisfy all the needs. So there must be some kind of
I think it's quite
avenue.
I think it's quite possible that as we go through like 10, 15, 20 people, I think you may end up creating some more robust document that we can share it with the broader community. But I think Sheikh Javan has a question, so I want to make sure the Azan will be called in any time.
Thank you for coming. The first thing, every year, for Hajj, and I still ask them also for the will. And there's a good form for kind of will by Eastern Ikna. I think everything you described is exactly there. The second, I think when you mentioned about the Waqf trust, then you talk about the life insurance. And what's the connection? Because as you know, the majority of life insurance is still haram, is forbidden. And there's a lot of people cast to kill their family just because of the life insurance. That's one of the reasons.
Interesting. So my point about the life insurance was, at least in my context, that is what I would use to fund a trust for my children. I wasn't intending to comment either way on whether it was haram or not, and that specific trust that is funded through life insurance would not be a waqf. It would just be a trust. It would be an educational trust for my children. And my point was that that's a potential option, and it can be funded through any number of different mechanisms. It doesn't have to be life insurance.
So I think we have like 8, anytime the Azan will be called, it's already 8 p.m. I think it's okay if we can have Q&A. If people want to ask after namaz, and then I think there is another program after namaz as well for the new board members coming in. So if people want to attend that, they can attend that too, and then can have a further question if they want, if it's okay, because I think Azan will be called any time now. Second thing that I want to highlight is that if I can just raise your hand if you want to have one-on-one session with any of these guys. Oh, wow. Okay, good.
That's exciting.
Good. That's very good. So please make sure that you write your email address, phone number, and contact. We will send you an email when to register it for the time. Probably we were thinking once a month. but I think we may need to decide a little bit more time. I'll work with our esteemed lawyers to find the time. But please do make sure to give us your contact information. We'll send the broader email as well, but individually as well. So again, I want to thank you, all of you, for coming, and really appreciate for the valuable discussion and Q&A. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please don't hesitate to pick up a card up here if you'd like to contact us individually. Please write your contact information down on the sheet as well. And
one important question, are you part of the ARAG at Microsoft? Are you part of, no? Okay.